Right now, Australian household wealth sits at $18.8 trillion. But here's what nobody tells you: 46% of that entire pile of money is controlled by just 10% of households. And if you've ever wondered what it actually takes to be in that top 10% at your age, this is the video that lays it all out. Because when most people hear Australia's richest 10%, they picture billionaires on Sydney Harbour, private jets, Gold Coast mansions. But the real numbers might shock you. The top 10% isn't as far away as you think, and it isn't as close as you hope. It depends almost entirely on how old you are and what you've done with the years you've had. Let's start at the beginning. If you're between 18 and 24, the median net worth in Australia is roughly $42,000. But the top 25% in that age bracket already sit at $120,000 or more. To crack the top 10% in your early 20s, you'd realistically need somewhere around $200,000 to $250,000 in net assets. That sounds insane for a 22-year-old, but it happens. Early inheritance, a small business, aggressive saving from a trade job that started at 17. Or yes, still living at home and stacking cash while your mates spend every dollar on rent and Uber Eats. Now let's jump to the 25 to 34 age group. The average household net worth for this bracket rose 63% in just 5 years, climbing from $340,000 to $550,000 by 2024 to 25. That's a massive jump. KPMG's analysis says it was largely driven by young Australians who managed to buy property during the ultra-low interest rate window in 2020 and 2021. They got in, prices surged, and now their net worth has ballooned. But the top 25% of this group sit at around $430,000 to $680,000, depending on whether you're closer to 25 or closer to 34. And to be in the top 10%, you're looking at roughly $700,000 to $900,000 or more. Most people at that age are still figuring out how to pay off their car loan, and the top 10% are sitting on close to $1 million in net assets. Moving into the 35 to 44 range, this is peak debt territory. The average household in this bracket carries $531,000 in loans. Mortgages, HECS. It's the most leveraged generation. But the top 25% hold $880,000 or more in net worth, and the top 10% are pushing past $1.3 million to $1.5 million. That's property equity, super balances, shares, and some cash. These households are building real momentum because compound growth on property and super is starting to accelerate. And this is also the decade where financial decisions carry the most weight. The difference between someone who starts investing $500 a month at 35 versus waiting until 45 can be hundreds of thousands of dollars by retirement. Now here's where the wealth really separates. Between 45 and 54, the median net worth climbs to around $610,000 to $720,000. The top quartile hits $1.1 to $1.26 million, and the top 10% sit between $1.8 million and $2.2 million. This is the decade where decades of super contributions, property appreciation, and maybe an investment property or share portfolio all start to compound. It's the reward for what you did in your 30s. It's also when high earners start salary sacrificing aggressively into super to take advantage of concessional contribution caps, shaving their tax bill while turbocharging their retirement balance at the same time. Then we reach the 55 to 64 bracket, the peak wealth years. Average household net worth in this group hits $2.507 million according to KPMG data. The top 10% in this age range are comfortably above $3.5 million, with some estimates pushing toward $4.5 million or higher. Super balances in this bracket average $756,000. Property wealth averages $1.529 million per household. And here's the kicker. This generation bought homes when prices were a fraction of what they are today. They've had decades of compound growth on assets that younger Australians can barely afford to enter. After 65, wealth starts to plateau and even decline slightly. The median net worth around 65 to 69 is roughly $980,000, and by 75 and beyond it drops to around $910,000 as retirees draw down super, sell assets, and fund their living costs. The top 10% of retirees still hold well over $3 million, but the trend reverses. You stop accumulating, you start spending. And this is the phase most people never plan for properly. They spend 40 years building wealth and then have no strategy for making it last. The top 10% in retirement aren't just rich because they earned more. They're rich because they structured their drawdown, diversified their income sources, and kept their money working even after they stopped. The top 10% of all Australian households hold an average net worth of $6.1 million. Meanwhile, the bottom 60% of households share just 17% of total wealth between them. That gap is not closing, it's widening, and it tells you something important. Wealth in Australia isn't just about income, it's about assets. The people who own property, who hold shares, who've let super compound for decades, they're the ones pulling away from everybody else. But here's the part that matters most. The people in the top 10% didn't all start rich. Many of them simply made different decisions at key moments. They bought property when they could. They maxed out super contributions in their 30s instead of their 50s. They held shares through downturns instead of panic selling. They lived below their means during the years everyone else was upgrading. And there's a shift happening right now that could change everything. Australia's baby boomers are expected to transfer $3.5 trillion to younger generations over the next 20 years. Gen X already holds more property wealth than boomers, averaging $1.445 million per household. Millennials are catching up fast, especially those who grabbed a foothold in housing. Younger Australians will also retire with far higher super balances than today's retirees because they're contributing from a much higher base and investing for longer. So wherever you sit on that spectrum today, the question isn't really whether the top 10% is achievable. The question is, what decisions are you making right now to close the gap? Because the data is very clear. Wealth is built over time through property, through super, through shares, and through discipline. And the earlier you start, the less extreme the effort has to be. If this video gave you a clearer picture of where you stand, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.